we have today another similar media debacle where the corporate media spent 3 years hyping this thing that they called the Havana syndrome, which began with diplomats in Cuba claiming that their brains were being targeted and harmed by some kind of new sonic weapon that nobody had ever heard of. The media ultimately claimed that it was almost certainly Russia that was behind it in the attempt to pent up American anger and hostility toward Russia, only for the parts of the government that actually want to gin up hostility toward Russia admitting what we've seen evidence of for quite a long time now, which is that the whole thing all along was essentially a scam. Here we have from the Washington Post a new article today, headline, quote, "Havana syndrome was not caused by energy weapon or foreign adversary, intelligence review finds." The Post explains, quote, "The mysterious ailment known as Havana syndrome did not result from the actions of a foreign adversary, according to an intelligence report that shatters a long disputed theory that hundreds of U.S. personnel were targeted and sickened by a clandestine enemy wielding energy waves as a weapon." The new intelligence assessment caps a years-long effort by the CIA and several other U.S. intelligence agencies to explain why career diplomats, intelligence officials, and others serving in U.S. missions around the world experience what they describe as strange and painful acoustic sensations. The effects of this mysterious trauma shortened careers, racked up large medical bills, and in some cases caused severe physical and emotional suffering. 7 intelligence agencies participated in the review of approximately 1,000 cases of, quote, anomalous health incidents, the term the government uses to describe a constellation of physical symptoms, including ringing in the ears, followed by pressure in the head and nausea, headaches, and acute discomfort. 5 of those agencies determined it was, quote, very unlikely that a foreign adversary was responsible for the symptoms, either as the result of purposeful actions, such as a directed energy weapon, or as the byproduct of some other activity, including electronic surveillance that unintentionally could have made people sick. They spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe the findings of the assessment, which had not yet been made public. Now, as everybody knows who watches my show or has followed my journalism, I'm somebody who strongly believes that skepticism is warranted when the U.S. intelligence community makes claims. And this is a case where the Washington Post is reporting the findings of the intelligence community that essentially none of this happened. So the question could be reasonably posed to me, why am I willing to place faith in this conclusion of an intelligence community assessment given my longstanding skepticism toward reports by the intelligence community? And I have several answers to that I think are dispositive of the question. First of all, we have to distinguish, as every rational field of discipline does, between assertions that somebody makes that advance or promote their interests versus assertions that they make that undermine their own interests. So, for example, if the CIA makes a claim about an enemy of the CIA, Russia interfered in our elections, Russia was controlling Vladimir Putin, it was Russia that sabotaged its own pipeline, you should have a huge amount of skepticism, because that's a case where the intelligence community is making assertions that advances its foreign policy agenda, its interests. But when the intelligence community makes statements that undermine their interests, when they admit that there's no evidence for a long-standing theory that accuses a U.S. enemy of some dastardly deed, as they're doing here, then it's entitled to a lot more faith and confidence, because this is a case where the intelligence community is making claims contrary to their interests. And as I said, this is a concept that should be self-evident logically. If someone says something that undermines their interests, that seems more trustworthy than someone making a claim that promotes their interest. But it's also recognized in the law, for example. Most of you are likely familiar with the concept of hearsay, which is when a witness or somebody makes a claim outside of the courtroom and is unavailable to testify themselves about whether they said it, someone is prohibited under the rules of hearsay from getting up on the stand and saying, so-and-so said this outside of the courtroom. Because it's so easy for a party to a lawsuit to make up claims that advance their own interest by claiming that somebody said something when the witness isn't there to say whether or not they actually said it. There's an exception, though, for when hearsay is actually admissible. There are several exceptions, but one of them is called a declaration against interest. We put this up on the screen. I won't delve deeply into the technicalities of what this means, but essentially it's what I just said, that the law regards a statement by a witness as being more credible if that statement undermines the interest of the person saying it than if it advances the interest of the person saying it. It's just a very common logical principle that we should be more skeptical of self-interested statements and more believing of of ones that undermine our self-interest. But the evidence that all of this is fake has been available for years and comes from many more sources than just the US intelligence community. I've been reporting on this story for years now, and it's been very clear that there's no evidence for it. Here in October of 2021, for example, we did an in-depth video. I believe it was something like 90 minutes, and the title of it was "The Latest CIA Media Fraud, Claiming Cricket Mating Sounds Are a Russian Sonic Microwave Attack." And this was in the wake of a study that had captured some of the noises that these diplomats claimed they were hearing that they believed constituted the sonic attack. And they were able to prove that those noises that they were hearing were identical to the mating sounds that crickets make, who are commonly found in the Caribbean, in places like Cuba. So here's the sound that the crickets make that was identical to what these people were claiming that they heard. All right, so that was the sound. And in this video, we examine all kinds of evidence, including what became a publicly available, non-classified study that essentially said the reason that so many diplomats began reporting the same symptoms is because they were all hearing the media reports that this danger existed, and that the media, by spreading this story, essentially created a form of mass psychosis, kind of a psychosomatic complex where people began believing they were suffering from this disease, even though it didn't really exist, because the more people who claimed it, the more paranoia they experienced. We can take a look at this report. First of all, here is the report about the cricket sound. It's from the Colorado Spring Harbor Laboratory. The title of it is "Recording of, quote, Sonic Attacks on U.S. Diplomats in Cuba Spectrally Matches the Echo Call of a Caribbean Cricket." Quote, "While the temporal pulse structure in the recording is unlike any natural insect source, when the cricket call is played on a loudspeaker and recorded indoors, the interaction of reflected sound pulse yields a sound virtually indistinguishable from the AP sample." The AP, the Associated Press, had collected a sample of what these people were claiming they heard, and when they compared it to the cricket sound, it became indistinguishable. This provides strong evidence, they said, that an echoing cricket call, rather than a sonic attack or other technological device, is responsible for the sound in the released recording. Although the causes of the health problems reported by the embassy personnel are beyond the scope of this paper, our finding highlights the need for more rigorous research into the source of these ailments, including the potential psychogenic effects, as well as possible physiological explanations unrelated to sonic attacks. So, in other words, what they were basically saying was they were doing it very delicately, because there were diplomats who were actually claiming that they were hearing these sounds. They wanted to take it seriously, and they were basically saying that the sounds are exactly the same as the crickets. It almost certainly came from the crickets. But let's remember as well just how implausible this whole story was from the start. The US government had, within its vast, sophisticated range of knowledge from employing some of the most sophisticated scientists on the planet, they had no concept of what kind of technology would enable a country like Russia to go around the world with a little portable weapon, a sonic weapon, that would enable it to target the brains of American diplomats and disable and debilitate and cripple these brains. This is like a technology from the 25th century. It would have required a leap of centuries in technological advance on the part of the Russians to be able to do this in a way that the American government not only was unable to detect with their scientists, but with all of their surveillance instruments. They had no concept of how this possibly could have happened. Here now is a report from a group that was compiled by the US government that was called JASON. It ended up being declassified. It's entitled Acoustic Signals and Physiological Effects on US Diplomats in Cuba. And they too essentially concluded the same thing, quote, "No plausible single source of energy, neither radio, microwaves, nor sonic, can produce both the recorded audio-video signals and the reported medical effects." In other words, there's no technology that could do this. "We believe the recorded sounds are mechanical or biological in origin rather than electric. The most likely source is the Indian short-tailed cricket." The most likely source is the cricket. They had a picture of the cricket, and they go on to say, "The call of the animal matches in nuanced detail the spectral properties of the recordings from Cuba once room echoes are taken into account. A possible explanation for the reported symptoms is psychogenic illness, in part because the science is weak to declare any causal links from RF or acoustic weapons to brain injury without prior baseline measurements and a control of similar background. It is also worth noting that psychogenic effects on vestibular function are common and the symptoms can be chronic. Although the JAMA paper dismisses such a, quote, dizziness theory, Jason believes psychogenic effects may serve to explain important components of the reported symptoms." Psychogenic effects is a very polite euphemism for basically saying that these people imagined what it was that they were experiencing as a result of social influences, such as what we're about to show you. Now, it's hard to overstate how all of this in the hands of the most fanatical disinformation agents in the country, who are not QAnon members, who are not on 4chan, who are not operating within pro-Trump Facebook groups, but who work instead, very tragically, at the largest media corporations in the world. In their hands, watch what they did with this story that never had any evidence to it. Here is the first story. It was from NBC News, and it was in 2019, and you're about to hear Andrea Mitchell and other top NBC News luminaries not only give great credence to this story, but place the blame in the lap of a nuclear-armed country.
The mystery: who or what caused American officials living in these Havana homes and several hotels to suffer headaches, dizziness, and some serious brain injuries similar to a concussion. Last year, Cuban investigators told us they would never allow their territory to be used that way. But now Russia is the leading suspect, NBC News has learned, according to 3 U.S. officials and 2 others briefed on the investigation. Evidence, they say, backed up by highly secret communications intercepts collected during a lengthy and ongoing investigation involving the FBI, CIA, and other agencies. U.S. officials also tell NBC News investigators now believe the Americans were deliberately targeted.
This is not an accident, and those who think this is some sort of rogue operation, I think, are operating in a fantasy world.
The State Department says it is still investigating.
We have not assigned any blame, and we continue to look into this.
Why would Russia target American officials? The leading theory: to disrupt President Obama's opening to then Cuban leader Raul Castro. No comment tonight from the Cubans or the Russians.
I mean, I almost want to play that for you again, because every single sentence is not just false, but incredibly dangerous and inflammatory and sensationalistic. And it's offered with almost no questioning or doubt at all. They acknowledge, the CIA and the FBI are telling them this. They do what they always do, which is they take what they're told by individuals inside these agencies who are trying to gin up anger toward Russia. And the subtext always is that Russia is our enemy and President Trump is doing nothing about it because he's the victim of blackmail and can't. He's beholden to Putin. And they, for 2 straight minutes, just repeated over and over that it was basically proven that the Russians had developed an extremely advanced sonic weapon and were using it to target American diplomats and debilitate their brains. I've seen that many times, and every time I watch it, it's just amazing, in part because these are the same people who will tell you every day and who really believe that the greatest threat to American democracy and all the values we hold dear in the West is disinformation. And these are the people who go and sit on panels where they talk about disinformation and how evil it is and how we can recognize it and how we can fight it. These are the people who want to censor the internet in the name of protecting you from disinformation, even though some of these people are just so dumb that they'll believe anything the government tells them with no critical thought of any kind, while others are just malicious. They're purposely disseminating disinformation because it advances their political agenda to do so. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.